This is Renata Nicole of If It's Magic, where if it's magic, we want to write and talk about if it's magic. So go ahead and light your candles, light your incense, and sip on your special herbal tea blend. And if you feel so inclined, go ahead and set a spell while we get right about it. Greetings, everyone. It's Renata Nicole of If It's Magic. Today is May the 2nd of 2021. And in this discourse, I want to go ahead and do a deep dive into my goodie bag and pull out the topic of the number 7. Now, you might be wondering, why 7? If this is the first video that I'm dealing with doing a number, why would I pick 7 instead of 0 or 1, which comes earlier in numerical order? Yeah, that'd be a good question. The reason why I pulled 7 out of my goodie bag of topics is because the number 7 is so heavily woven, especially within Western tradition, that to ignore the constant pattern that we see of 7 being just embedded throughout so much of what we do in our society and how we talk and see the world, it would kind of be a hindrance from us really understanding what is really going on at the core of things. For example, we have the 7 wonders of the world. There's the 7 modes of ancient Greek music, 7 openings of the head, the 2 eyes, the 2 ears, your 2 nostrils, and then the mouth. There's the 7 days a week. There's the 7 colors of the rainbow, the 7 deadly sins, the 7 African powers, the 7 Pleiades, the 7 chakras. We have 7 days of creation, including that final day of rest. There's the 7 gifts of the Holy Spirit, 7 virtues, 7 doors of hell in Islam. You got the 7 angels. I should say 7 archangels. Let me correct myself. The 7 sleepers of Christian tradition. There's the 7 celestial sages, the Satarishis. There's the 7 vices. And then after you get through kind of diving through, because there's more 7s than that, but after you get through diving through all of those 7s, you kind of arrive at the fact that there are 7 classical planets. And when you get here, when you get to the 7 classical planets, you've kind of hit 7 at its core. And why is that? Okay, to understand that, you have to go back in time. You have to go back in time and realize that so much of what we do in society today is based off of ancient belief systems stemming from out of ancient Babylon and ancient Egypt, also known as Kemet. So when we go back into time and we look and we see what were people then talking about, thinking about, studying about, what was the concepts and traditions of that time, we go back and we hit on the 7 classical planets. You can't escape it. If you study the history, you're going to hit back there. So what happens when you get there? When you get there, you realize that the word planet had an earlier definition meaning wanderer. Okay, why is that important? Because the reason why it's important for us to understand that the word planet used to mean wanderer is because currently today, astronomers tell us what the planets are. First, they told us Pluto was a planet. Now they're telling us it's a dwarf planet, which is a subdivision of planet. Then they've got Makemake, Haumea. They got all these other little dwarf planets that they're talking about. They're talking to us about, they're explaining to us that the planets that they used to say were planets, these aren't really planets. Let's just rewind it and back it up. The original definition, or I should say an earlier definition of planet, was wanderer. Okay, so what does that mean? Make that plain and make it simple and relevant to me. Okay, So if we understand that the word planet means wanderer, then it better helps us to understand that when they said the 7 classical planets, I'm going to list them for you. The 7 classical planets were the sun, the moon, you had Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and you had Saturn. Off the bat, many of us can say, wait a minute, the sun is not a planet, not as defined today, but if it's under the word wanderer, the sun clearly wanders across the sky. It sets in one part of the sky and raises in the other. So I know that that's moving. The moon moves across the sky. It doesn't stay in the same spot. So the moon is wandering. So even though we know that the sun is a star and we know that the moon is Earth's natural satellite, that's under the definition of today. We would say, okay, it's not a planet. But if we, like I said, rewind it back in time, the people of ancient times were using the word planet to mean something different. So they were saying these were the wanderers, the wandering stars, as opposed to what? If you got wandering stars, what is that opposed to? To help us better understand what these ancient people were talking about, as opposed to fixed stars. So fixed stars are what we can think of as like our constellations. You have the Big Dipper and the Little Dipper, and you have the Orion's belt in the heavens. And you have all of these different constellations where if you look, they always are in a pattern that show up together. It's not like you look up and one of the stars is so many degrees away from the other one. They're always kind of clustered together. Whereas the moon can be found all throughout the sky. Some nights I look and it seems like the moon is in the southern part of the sky. Then I look, it seems like it's to the west. It's just moving around. It's got so many places to go that it seems like it's popping up and showing up in the heavens. So it is a wanderer, which is a planet. The sun, like I said earlier, goes from one side to the other. When you start looking for planets, because I know some people say, I can't see the planets. Listen, if you're living somewhere and there's a lot of pollution and things like that, and what I mean, light pollution. A lot of times we don't realize that street lights and things like that makes it harder to see. Or if the clouds are out, it's hard to see. But if you go out in the country, you go out where there's not a lot of people living and there's not a lot of light, you can look up in the heavens and you can see that the stars are there. You can see Mars with the naked eye. And you have to understand the reason why I don't count Neptune or Uranus, counting these as planets, was because they didn't have telescopes to look through and see the planet. They were looking at these with their natural eye. And if you go out today, the planet that you can see with the human eye, unaided with any kind of scientific mechanisms, the furthest one you can see is Saturn. So, like I said, the 2 luminaries, sun and the moon, and then what we now consider planets, which are Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn, are 7 classical planets. And by understanding these 7 classical planets, it will help you to understand more about yourself, or at least that's what the thought behind it is. Why do they say that? Why do people want to go and find out what's going on in the heavens? Because when I was a kid, I used to wonder, why do we spend so much time in the heavens? Another wonder, like, why do we go down into the ocean? And we'll talk about that too. Why do we have that urge to search? Understanding that concept that we are the microcosm of the macrocosm. We are the smaller of the greater. And realizing that if I can understand what's going on outside of me, I can better understand what's going on inside of me. Because have you ever noticed? It's like you can see other people's flaws. You can see what's good about other people, and they have a hard time seeing it. Well, alternatively, sometimes we can't figure out what's going on with ourselves. We have a hard time really understanding what our issues are and things like that. But when we talk to someone else, they can help us, because what it is that it's kind of like we're going through this world And other people are the mirrors that show us ourselves. And without some type of external thing, you can't see what's the back of you. You can't see in your blind spot. The only way you can see what's behind you is by using a mirror, something to aid you so that you can see those things. So to fully see ourselves, we need to look. We need someone else to help us or some other device. But because we see that there's patterns, that there are things that are we can study other things that show us ourselves. One of the things you can study is the heavens. I mean, you can study so many different topics and get a better understanding of yourself. But when you study the heavens, you study those 7 core planets, there's so much information there. And just taking it a step further, I know sometimes it's like, well, the ancients didn't really know what they were talking about. They didn't know what they were doing. I wouldn't say that. When I study the works written by ancient people, I think sometimes we misinterpret their thoughts. For example, when I was in school, I was taught at times everyone worshiped the planets or they worship this or that. But then as I was studying work done by Chris Brennan, he suggested that there's some evidence that people knew that these energies are the planets. They saw them as representations of the gods. So it's not like that everyone saw them as planets. I'm not saying no one worshiped the planets. I'm saying that it is highly conceivable that some of the learned people saw them more as representations of energies and not necessarily the energy itself. Now, I don't know. I wasn't there. I didn't live in ancient times. But what I can say is that so much of what we do today stems from ancient belief systems. And so to better understand what we're doing now, it's good to know what was going on then. And so with that said, I will be doing a deep dive into these 7 classical planets. And it's not just going to be stuff like the sun, what the sun does. It's going to be like, okay, if the sun is ancient word for the sun is soul, S-O-L. How does that deal with the soul, S-O-U-L? And what does that speak to and how it speaks to our consciousness and things like that. I'm not just going to talk about how Mercury is a fast moving planet, but I'm going to dive into concepts of how Mercury is associated with energies like the African deity Eshu and Hermes, the Greek. And I'm going to talk about how Mercury deals with our ability to communicate and break down and analyze things. So I'm also going to talk about how in ancient times, Jupiter's color used to be associated with white. So instead of like now we say just purple. So I'm going to really do a deep dive and explore these 7 classical planets. And yes, I'm going to stick with planets. I know the sun and the moon are luminaries or, a star and a natural satellite. But I'm going to say 7 classical planets and I'll be back. So you already know it. I'm out.